Well, ladies and gentlemen, this is 6 o'clock, and I'm gonna kick this thing off, this public hearing for our finances, budget for 2021, and basically, we'll have the people that like to present different entities for us. We'll let you talk, and then we'll talk about the budget in different categories and just review our budget. And I'm gonna ask Ms. Thomas, our manager, to go ahead and kick us off.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The F-121, golly, it's hard to believe we're actually at this year in time, but this budget, the draft budget, has been on file at the clerk's office since June 4th, available for public review. You guys have had it for review yourself. The attached budget report highlights some changes in revenue that we were looking at. Right now, it's still the overall economic impact of the COVID-19 pandemic is still uncertain. Our last sales tax revenue stream was comparable to what it has been running the last 12 months and the last 18 months. That reflects March's sales. So at that time period, things were just getting started. People were rushing to the grocery store, so it's hard to know what might happen. Our sales tax that comes in at the end of June will be reflective of April. And I think that will give us a better understanding of what the impact was on sales tax. The way that I budgeted revenue in this year is have to step back to a point in time last year. And the way that I budgeted sales tax revenue is we made a conscious decision that anything that we brought in real growth or inflationary growth that we took last year was going to be set aside. And the idea was moving forward with capital improvement projects. We've talked many times before about a new judicial or administrative building, and our idea is if we can take that money and set it aside for a few years, then we can know that we can support a debt service payment or pay a good chunk of it going forward. Well, because of that approach, we now have that revenue that we did not use for operational purposes this year, so we can use it again, use it this year to offset the drop in sales tax. So I feel like we are at a better position than maybe some of our counterparts in other counties because of that. The budget includes a $500,000 estimated reduction in sales tax and a $300,000 reduction in fines and forfeitures. As you guys know, the court system has been closed and just recently starting to open back up. It is unknown how long that is going to impact us. Did it just impact us in this fiscal year, or are we going to see a slowdown in the court systems as we learn how to adjust to the new normal? So I think leaving that reduction in there is okay. We have to do the budget prior to any of the sales tax, or excuse me, we have to do the budget prior to the tax digest. So any growth that we see, with one exception I'll talk about in a second, any growth that we see, or any inflationary growth, we have the option of rolling that back because this budget is not created on increased property tax, with the exception of our largest taxpayer. It is anticipated from their returns that their bill will increase, and we will utilize that to fund our health insurance so that our employees, since I did not budget for a COLA, they will not be impacted by their pocketbook, and it takes care of some of our fixed expenses that are what I classify as uncontrollable, things that we are required to have increase. Our expenditures, there's some charts in those files. Salaries and wages account for 67% of the overall cost, and you can kind of go through some of the other ones. We at Franklin County, some of our risk areas is that we only budget capital expenditures very minimally at about 1.3% of our overall costs. About 53% of all of our budgets go to public safety. That's sheriff is about 30%, public safety, which would include E911 and EMS, is 23%. You tack onto the judicial system in there, and that is where the bulk of a lot of our funding goes to. Global adjustments that we made based on decisions that we made on our health insurance, the projected total increase for health insurance this year is approximately $175,000. That's based on a fully staffed model. and based on a 7.5% increase in those premiums that we saw. There are no COLAs or other global increases for staff. There are changes in elected official salary calculations that are prescribed by law that are not currently included in our budget. Due to the delay in the legislative session, those calculations with those new salary figures are not in. So those will need to be adjusted globally for the longevity increases and the changes in offices. Property insurance increased by $22,000. Retirement, I have a projected increase of $85,000 based on prior year adjustments. I did not put any adjustments in for workers' comp. However, I did increase the required firefighter policy by $1,700. Workers' comp is still an unknown. That could go up. For right now, I'm assuming a steady rate. Fixed expenses, there's a chart inside your report. They're comparable. I could go in and I try to adjust them each year. That's a fixed expense. That's not a discretionary spending. You're gonna have to pay your light bill. And unless you wanna close your office down, there's not a lot that you can do to change that aspect of it. But I believe those are standard, or safe enough, close enough to the actual versus budget to leave those the same. There are some risk areas in our budget. We've talked about several times over several years, and that's our pay scale being below market. Our reliance on SPLOST for updates and upgrades on our aging facility. We have no vehicle replacement policy. Our highways and streets, if you'll recall, in FY16, we adjusted to everybody's run rate. We said, okay, we were so far off actual budget, the first year I came in, we adjusted to everybody's run rate. And then we looked at everything that we could possibly control and pull back. And we ended up cutting our gravel budget and our contract labor and asphalt budget by about 35%. That has never been reinstated. So even though we come under budget in the road department, it is because of conscious efforts to be as conservative as we can with gravel application and holding on projects until the end of the year to know how much do we have to compensate, or how much do we have left over. Radio system, we're having issues with being on an analog system. We have to look at converting over to a digital system. That is not in our SPLOST money, so we have to look at operationally how can we do that. All of our EMS monitors need to be replaced, and there's no budget for this. And of course, GIS and technology. Technology needs to be kind of on the forefront of where we're going next with Franklin County. And our last flyover was done in the fall of 2014. I budgeted for it and kind of estimated for it to happen for the past 2 years, and they have not done. We try to go in group-wise. I did get an email from GMRC a couple of weeks ago, asking for interest again. How many people are interested in doing a flyover? And we should definitely do
When did you say the last time was?
fall of 14.
14. What does that cost to do that?
That was before my time to know. I budgeted in our numbers about $15,000 for our component. It fluctuates based on how many jurisdictions.
I was curious what that would. That's where they fly over and map the properties for the tax.
And we do not look at doing LiDAR, the more expensive version. We would just do the flat, although LiDAR is pretty. For me, I love looking at maps, but I'm like, why can't you put a house here? This looks just fine, and then you don't realize that there might be a.
I'm not sure a lot of people are even aware that's out there, that you can pull that up and look. It's pretty nice.
I don't have it right here. That is the adult version of Facebook stalking. I don't do social media, but I can tear open a Cube Public search. So it is wonderful, especially when people try to say, oh, I don't have that on my property. It's right here. It's really good. And honestly, for us as Franklin County, taking us to the next step in technology, we really need to look at integrating our GIS system. And we've got a really talented people in our county that can do this when we get ready to consolidate these. I shouldn't say consolidate departments because I don't want to scare anybody. But we really need to look at integrating our planning and zoning and our 911 and our tax assessor's office in this mapping. And it is a skill set that's very specific. And I think we're ready to take that next step. It's not in the budget, but I would love to see us carve it out. Even if I have to start on a part-time basis and move forward, we need to get that GIS program going. With that, there wasn't a lot. You have the listing of I get it. The listing of all budget requests, which were very limited because of the unknown forecast. There were global adjustments that I've already talked about. There were some new operations, animal shelters here tonight. I did include their increase in my budget, and I want to say my rationale behind that, and that is when the newspaper did a countywide study of what is it that Franklin County wants, much to my dismay, because I know how expensive it is, the county overwhelmingly wants a countywide animal control. Now, I don't think we're ready for that, so we are blessed to have the animal shelter, and I know what struggles they have and where they've been operating on their budget. So to take a step back, when the county says, hey, we want countywide animal control, to take a step backwards seems counterproductive to what our citizens want. We talked about public defender in prior meetings. The library administration, they did ask for some increased funding for cleaning purposes. And of course, the library became more important as we went through this Corona event, and those that did not have internet would see there. The most expensive thing that I put in the budget was a technology contract, which I think is very important that we have right now. We have saved money over the past 3 years by not having that on contract, but we cannot do that forever. We're at too big of a risk to not have in the BOC and my 8 departments a dedicated IT contract to watch our backs, in essence. If you guys have any questions, I'll be happy to answer them. I think we've got one guest that would like to speak during the public hearing. Well, we got plenty of guests. Anybody that wants to speak can come up, but I noticed Dr. Stone came in tonight to speak.
Just a quick question regarding the IT. I know there's a lot of malware that's going around, specifically targeting municipalities, counties, with essentially hostage software. Is that something that IT partnership would help with? I mean, like right now, something happens. I know generally most insurance policies have data breach coverage and things like that. Is that kind of how we're covering that base?
Well, they do cover sometimes the payment or the recovery. Right now we are working, and when I say we, I'm talking about the Board of Commissioners, my server, and each of my little departments that are not connected. So Franklin County is not on a centralized server together. BOC's a server. Each one of my buildings have basically a beefed up computer that acts as their file server. We have been working under the good graces of the guy who set us up, Quick Technologies. He pretty much comes to us on an ad hoc basis. The way that we have our backups is we store internally. I've got 2 servers, they back up to each other. We back up to tape every other day and put it in the safe. The only thing that we don't do very good is taking it off site. But this contract will, in essence, give us a 3rd backup, and that backup will be off-site with him.
Okay.
Do we have anything off-site like remote servers? For instance, like is our website separate in a separate remote server, or is it tied in with our?
Our website needs a lot of updating, and I talked about that. And when we go through the Unicode process, our website is on the hard files are on Gina's file server there at the elections office, and it's cloud hosted on the website. We don't have anything off-site.
Yeah. Well, the reason I'm saying, the website mostly it's information. It might make sense, and it might be cheaper to host that remotely. I mean, because then you don't have any security issues if you just have mostly information there. I mean, I know people, they, I guess, log on to pay their water bill, and that's separate. I'm sure that goes out of the website to a separate location.
Yeah,
But
that's a third party.
it might be less expensive to house that portion off-site, because then security is not as big an issue for just the website because it's just free information.
Yeah. Thankfully, that third party, the water payment is hosted third party.
Yeah,
The
they do their
cities,
own.
They pay them directly, so
Okay.
and that's the way I'd like to keep it. I did get the price quote. I told y'all it would be about $10,000 from Unicode to redesign our website, and about $2,200 annually to host. And we did a great job 5 years ago and updated, and we really pushed the website, and I use it every day. But
Yeah.
5 years is a lifetime.
And you said Unicode was going to actually do the website?
Yeah, they'll
Okay.
redesign it.
Okay.
And then $2,200 a year. And yes, I can shop it out, and there's others that we've looked at, and been working working with some others.
Well, they'll have their own security. I mean, they'll have their own security. I'm sure they'll host it too.
We just want to make sure that we can be the administrators of it.
Yeah. How long is left till in SPOS 5? I mean, when does that run out, and what happens then?
About 3 years till it runs out, so we're about 3 years in. It seems longer than that because we voted it in a year early.
Yeah.
3 years in, 3 years out. What happens, you'll have to make a decision of whether or not you want to renew it. You'll go before the voters. Of course, there's a lot of pre-work into that and saying, hey, where do we want our categories to go? 100% recommend that we keep going on it, because if we don't, we have a hospital payment. And the hospital payment, you know, we spread it out over an assumed 3 SPLOS cycles to make it affordable so that we didn't use all of our SPLOS.
So which one are we in now with that?
We're in the first SPLOS
Just in
cycle
the
to pay
first.
the hospital.
I think that we might want to look at that SPOS, if a SPOS 6 with, you know, the capital expenditures as far as like a government center, courthouse, jail. Because how else are we really going to fund that?
Yeah, well, actually, there's a couple of ways you can fund it. What you need to do, and I'll get you the listing of the current SPLOS 5 categories. And then you see, we know what the hospital bed is.
Yeah.
You know what you have to give to public safety, and honestly, we're coming short on public safety because our EMS units have increased by about $40,000 per unit. You multiply that times 5 units, and all of a sudden, you got an entire unit that you can't pay for in the SPLOS budget. But then you ask yourself, what category am I going to take it out of to give it to the admin building? The other approach that I've looked at is capital leases. Capital leases are a way where somebody else can build it and pay for the upfront costs, and in essence, we pay rent.
Yeah.
Just to break it down, we pay rent. If we could get it down to, I think, a $5 or $6 million facility, you might be looking at a $400,000 to $500,000 debt service payment. Well, that's actually less than the amount of funds that we had set aside last year in our budgeting process. So my concept with that was, hey, if we can prove that we can do this for 2 or 3 years, that's our debt service payment. We prove that we're operating without this tax revenue. Now you have this tax revenue carved out for this debt service payment. You're not impacting anybody's SPLOS for the needed things that we need because we have such a heavily reliance on it. It's a hard expenditure to do, but it's just like getting married and building your house. Nobody is able to save up for their house anymore. You have to go to the bank and you have to get a loan and you build your house and you pay on it for the next 30 years.
And you said we have 3 more years left in this one, and we're in the first year of our hospital.
First SPLOS cycle.
First SPLOS cycle.
And I can show you all those debt service and those breakdowns. There's multiple ways that you can do SPLOS. SPLOS can be run on a 5-year cycle or a 6-year cycle. If you do the 5-year, that's without the agreements with the cities. You can do it projects by levels. Level 1, courthouses, jails. Level 2, and you do those projects, and then you get down to the end, and then you allocate it amongst the cities. That is going to be up for you to work your magic with your new relationships, because they are not going to like that you're going to take their bucket of money away. So that's why we always look at the 6-year cycle and entering in those agreements and saying, how do we split that money? And then what's hard about that is the county bears the full cost of countywide services. So out of our 70% that we're getting, we have to build the courthouse that's intended for all the inhabitants.
Yeah.
But that's a very delicate negotiation that I am not good at. So
Yeah, we're going to have to work on that. I mean, because we're going to have to do that realistically at some point. I mean, you know, having you, we're going to have to do something over there with the jail and with our government center. And
yeah, I think our
I guess-
government center can be done with a capital lease. Jails cannot. Although I hear conflicting reports about that, but I would recommend that we look towards a capital lease for our admin. I don't want to call it admin building because I think it needs to be a judicial center.
I had one other question about, a few months ago, we talked about Paladin Wireless. Have we ever heard any more from them about whether or not they would rent space on that tower?
No, well, yes, they're highly interested in it. The last update on it is we were trying to figure out on our end how to handle the building. So whether or not we allow them to put a building in or not, we ran the calculations, and we did not want them to be a sole renter on that tower space. So when we got done creating our building and looking at it, we decided, nope, we don't want to build the building for them, so we're back down into building the building ourselves. But
I didn't realize they had, so they actually, I thought they just hung their equipment on the
they have
tower.
to have a power source, they have to
Okay.
have some equipment. So that went into our pricing on it. So the
Were they interested in that thing we talked about, maybe exchanging rent for free Wi-Fi, local Wi-Fi service?
I think they're open to that. I can't tell you
Okay.
whether or not they wanted to or not. There was a new gentleman that was involved that wanted to come and meet with me. And I told him we were working on the building details before I wanted to bring him in. I had said in our last meeting, I think, the best idea would be to give them free rent for so long. But let's be
Yeah.
reasonable about the rent. We currently charge about $1,300 for Southern Link to be on our Gerard Tower. So we don't want to give away.
And is that that's 1,300 a year or a month?
Every month.
A month, okay. But there's still communication. But before maybe they weren't so easy to get a hold of.
I didn't get the information that I thought that we needed, but they did finally provide that mapping.
Okay, that's
You
good to
look
know.
like you had a whole list of questions.
I was just writing stuff down. I think that's it.
Mr. Swells, did you have any? I didn't mean to.
No.
When I start talking about budget, I talk a lot. Okay. That's it, Mr. Chairman, unless you guys have any more questions for me.
Do we need to hear from Ms.
I think that would be good if,
I was mainly here if you had questions. The letter you got electronically, and then I gave you the hard copy, but
Well, you did a good job bringing information here and so forth, and I believe Beth has already put it in the budget to fund what you requested.
I understand right now it is in the budget, and
Yeah.
I appreciate that and the support. And as you said, I feel like it is very important. And it's not just serving the citizens here, it's also, just within the last week, the director met deputies 4 times, bringing animals off of DUI stops out on the interstate. They were in the car, the guys got arrested, had to bring the animals to the shelter. Bite cases, rabies holes, that kind of thing too. And I was telling, there was one actually where, I don't know if it was an accident or a DUI, but anyway, the dog was in the car, the deputies couldn't get it out. It was acting kind of vicious. They put the car on the rollback, drove the rollback to the shelter, and then Tammy got up on the rollback, got the dog out of the car, and took it in. But, I mean, there seems like that, you don't think about it. It's not just dropping off strays or animals that people can't keep anymore, that sort of thing, which is an important service. And of course, adopting out, people have a place to come and adopt animals. We work heavily with rescue groups because we take in something close to 3,000 a year, 2,800, 3,000 a year. And I think 44% of those come from unincorporated Franklin County. So we do take in a lot of animals, and we're not a no-kill shelter, we can't be, unfortunately, but at our meeting last night, our count of euthanasias, because sometimes it is necessary, I think it was 38 so far this year. So in 6 months, 38 animals, and we've probably taken in 1,500, maybe 1,400.
Wow.
So that's pretty good. We've been working really hard with rescue groups to get them networking and taking them out of state even, and finding homes for them that way. So plus people that adopt them locally and such. So that's really a good service in that respect. But the main thing as far as the county is concerned is there's a place for people to take these animals. Unfortunately, I don't know why people still dump animals out in the county. You know what happens. And they have a place they can take them and bring them for free. But people will still do that. Or sometimes they just wander up stray. They aren't dumped. They just wander onto somebody's property and nobody knows who they belong to. But there is an option now at the shelter that people can take them there and not be stuck with them and have to, heaven forbid, go shoot them or something, But, and I think you're all aware and agree that the shelter is a good service. And basically the letter is saying that we haven't asked for an increase since 2009. And obviously our costs of operating, including wages, which is the biggest one, but they run around 60%. Insurance, and we're really just charging the operational costs. Maintenance and such we do with our donations and fundraising. But our budgets run around $220 a year, and we get about $158, $160 from all the jurisdictions, 2 counties and 7 cities together. So it's a great way of working together to reduce the cost for everyone. But we've been subsidizing to the tune of 50,000 plus a year with fundraising donations, requests, and so forth. Grants, we write a lot of grants. Trying to do spay neuter, that's another thing we do. We get spay neuter grants and offer them to the citizens at very reduced rates to help prevent some of these unwanted litters that end up in the county and such. So, we're basically asking with this letter and this increase now. If you may remember last year, I said, we're not asking for an increase this year, but I will be back next year with one. And this is it. We need to, increase it to cover our costs because we've added another building and we also are gonna have to add on another space because the Department of Agriculture has changed the rules so that we have to have increased space for the animals. Even if they're from the same household, we can't house them together now. So we're having to, and that will help with infection control too, so hopefully we won't be having to close down if we have a parvo outbreak or something like that. And also, in case anyone didn't know, we did, during the shutdown, we did close our drop-in hours. You couldn't just drop in at the shelter unannounced during our regular operating hours that we used to have, but we were available by appointment throughout. We had a sign and it put it in the paper and in the radio and so forth, that if they would call, we'd make an appointment. They met them out in the parking lot, did the paperwork, took the animal in, and that way we did the social distancing thing, but it did, of course, reduce traffic. And we still took animals in, but we were open throughout. And we were available to animal control and the deputies and so forth at any time, even after hours. Excuse me.
I was going to ask it, is there a way after hours where deputies, police officers have a way to drop an animal off?
Yes, they all have Tammy's cell phone and they
Okay.
don't hesitate to call her at 2 in the morning sometimes.
Okay.
But, she gets up and meets them up there.
All right.
And,
Do you feel like with the federal laws, I read how President Trump just essentially enacted a federal law that I think it could be a felony, federal offense to abuse animals. Do you think there may be an uptick in reports or in people dropping off animals as a result of that?
possibly, we see upticks for lots of different reasons. Some people couldn't keep their animals through this virus cycle, whatever, and we drop off of that. But it's possible that we have had a few animals come in that they were supposedly trained, but they had been abused, but they had just been living hard out in the countryside and back on the animals or something. It's hard to say for sure. I think the people bringing them in probably, but,
Yeah.
I'm sure there is that going on in some cases, unfortunately, and we probably will see some.
I just remember years ago in one of the cities, there was a dog chained to a tree, and it was the middle of winter and raining and couldn't get to food, and the dog was, I could tell, suffering. And the police chief of that particular city said, well, there's nothing we can do. There aren't laws that would allow me to do anything.
Right.
Which to me, I think that's very sad. But hopefully with this federal law, maybe there's some backing where if someone does recognize abuse happening, they have something to stand on to report.
That would be good. The problem is going to be, again, enforcement. In the city of Livonia, I know with animal control and so forth, people can report situations like that, and the animal control officer will go and talk to them, and there is, they can work with them, and I don't know what kind of fines there may be, and they do work with us too if necessary to take the animal in or whatever may be needed. And in the county where there's not animal control, it would almost have to go through the sheriff as far as someone reporting it as a abuse of an animal or whatever. And as you said, with the federal law, maybe that will be done more. Because I've seen those situations too, and sometimes you're afraid to go up to the house and ask about it.
Well, yeah.
I've offered to take the animal. I said, would you give me the animal? No, get off my property. So, but anyway, unfortunately, there is some of that going on. Hopefully not much in Franklin County, but I know it's out there.
Appreciate that.
Okay, thank you very much. I said, here, mostly for questions, but appreciate very much your support.
Yeah. We got any other question from Ms. Thomas, anybody? This is just a public hearing to give you ideas and so forth. You good? You good to go?
Yeah.
I think we're good to go. Do we have to stay in this, just till we get through, because they've had opportunities, 30 minutes now is plenty long enough. I don't think somebody will be quite that late, hopefully.
I think that might be one of our longest budget meetings and maybe our most well
Well,
attended.
real smooth. It pays off to have good information beforehand. Thank you very much. Why don't we stand adjourned?